Something incredibly disturbing has come to my attention involving the world's oldest, largest, and arguably the most mysterious structure in all of human history. In fact, what I recently learned is almost unbelievable. Now, let me first say that I imagine by now that we are all familiar with the truly extraordinary site of Gobekli Tepe located in Turkey. Dated at approximately 11,600 years old, it is by far the oldest megalithic site found anywhere on Earth. In fact, it's nearly 7,000 years older than the already mysterious site of Stonehenge. And not only that, Gobekli Tepe is a whopping 50 times larger than Stonehenge itself, as it covers an area of approximately 22 acres. In fact, to put its size into perspective, that's equivalent to 90 football fields combined. And besides the fact that it is the oldest, largest megalithic site on Earth, it is arguably the most mysterious, as it is the very definition of prehistoric, in that we have absolutely no idea who built it, how, or even precisely when. All we know is that it was buried approximately 11,600 years ago, and possibly intentionally, leading many to theorize that it could be a time capsule of some kind. And based on everything that we were taught in school about the emergence of civilization out of Mesopotamia around 6,000 years ago, the discovery of Gobekli Tepe in 1995 totally upended the conventional view of the rise of human civilization, as prior to its discovery, historians would have said that something this old and sophisticated couldn't possibly exist. However, the mystery does not stop there, as this site is comprised of an estimated 200 sophisticated T-shaped pillars, a vast majority of which are still buried underground, but have been identified through the use of ground-penetrating radar. Many of these pillars reach heights of nearly 20 feet tall, in some way as much as 10 metric tons, or just over 22,000 pounds apiece. And notice the 3D carvings of animals and other various depictions on these pillars. In other words, this was carved with the highest level of difficulty possible, as it would be far easier to etch a depiction into stone rather than carve around the stone to shape a 3D object. Make no mistake, this is not some primitive attempt by cavemen to play with rocks, and it could not be more clear that vast planning, logistics, and high levels of ingenuity went into creating this enormous project. Again, the largest of its kind on Earth. So again, who created this, how, and just as importantly, why? What adolescent prehistoric civilization could possibly have achieved this, and what would motivate them to do so? And this also begs the question as to how they transported hundreds of these pillars, which again weigh as much as 22,000 pounds or 10,000 kilograms. Which only becomes more curious when you consider that this site was created well over 5,000 years before the known invention of the wheel. Think about that. Now, here are a few more details that you should know about this site, which will become very important for what I'm going to drop on you later in this video. The unbelievable part that will startle any enthusiast of ancient history. As I mentioned, ground-penetrating radar has potentially identified an estimated 200 of these pillars, and only 72 have been unearthed in the 29 years since the excavation began in 1995. And this site is comprised of 20 known circular sections, or enclosures, that have up to 12 pillars each, and only 6 of these 20 enclosures have been excavated, however, not even fully. And this does not include a series of square and rectangular compartments, as well as whatever else lies beneath the ground that was not identified through ground radar, as it simply cannot see everything the deeper you scan. And this is just what we see at the surface, as again, the areas needing excavation covers over 22 acres. Now, I must point out something important, which is that if you followed this topic for the last several years, you would have likely have heard Graham Hancock and others repeatedly mention that only 5% of Gobekli Tepe has been excavated, again as confirmed through ground-penetrating radar. In fact, that 5% figure was first reported in 2008, which was 14 years after excavations had first started. And by the way, we must all give credit to Graham Hancock, who brought this ancient site to international attention in his best-selling books, as well as his appearances on Joe Rogan's podcast. In fact, I'm sure many of you will remember this epic debate Graham Hancock had against skeptic Michael Shermer on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast number 961, which went viral and brought many more eyes and enthusiasts to the topic of Gobekli Tepe and lost ancient civilizations as a whole. But here's the thing. That podcast was in May of 2017, more than 7 full years ago. In fact, that became the topic of what is now my oldest video on my YouTube channel. So this got me recently wondering if that 5 percentile excavation figure had improved in the 7 years since. So I took it upon myself to do some inquiring as to what advances of excavations have occurred at this site in the last several years since that 5% figure received international attention. And I was stunned to learn that it had not changed at all in the years between 2017 and 2021, as reported by the worldheritagefund.org. However, 2021 is 3 years ago now, so I searched further and found a 2023 article that included a quote by a professional guide that works at Gobekli Tepe, and she stated that the estimate was still only at 5%. How is it possible that no measurable advances to this dig have been made? I mean, excavations began 29 years ago, nearly a third of a century. So why are we still at 5%, and what is the holdup? And this is where things start to get bizarre. While doing my investigations into this matter, author Hugh Newman, who recently visited Gobekli Tepe and corroborated the same thing involving that 5% figure, well, he also said something that stood out to me, where he stated that in the context of future large-scale excavations at Gobekli Tepe, the consensus was that that site might be left for, and I quote, future generations, as there would be more focus placed on excavations at the neighboring site of Karen Tepe, which, by the way, is an incredible site in itself. But wait a second, what do you mean Gobekli Tepe will be left for future generations? That statement took me aback, so I took it upon myself to look into his claims on the matter and was blown away at what I found. The powers that be have chosen to pass on the full excavations to future generations and have chosen to focus on preserving the site and establishing tourism infrastructure there. So, upon learning that, this led me down the path of trying to figure out who exactly manages and funds the site of Gobekli Tepe, and who are the key decision makers deciding what happens at this site. Which led me to the Dogus Group, which is one of the largest private sector conglomerates in Turkey, with a portfolio of some 250 companies in 7 different industries, including tourism, which is how I came to learn that a 20-year partnership deal was established back in 2016 that enabled the Dogus Group to oversee excavations and tourism management at Gobekli Tepe. And more specifically, this partnership facilitated that the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism will enable the Dogus Group to become the sole partner of this Neolithic site, which includes, and I quote, a generous donation for the ongoing excavations at this site, a sum of $15 million. So real quick, just to clarify, any talk of funding being an issue for the holdup in excavations at Gobekli Tepe is simply not true. That has nothing to do with it. The Dogus Group has no shortage of money, and to be clear, funding was never said to be an issue in slowing the excavation process at this site. So funding aside, the part that I'm going to show you now is the part that's not only disturbing, but practically unbelievable. Yet it's managed to hide in plain sight for the last few years. But real quick, let me take this moment to share the sponsor of this video. We've all seen how crazy and uncertain the world has become, which is why all of us should be taking steps to be prepared. Which is why I highly recommend the purchasing of an emergency medical kit from the Wellness Company, which will allow you to preemptively obtain prescriptions for antibiotics such as amoxicillin, hydrochloroquine, Z-Pax, Tamiflu, to just name a few, and even ivermectin, which has been incredibly difficult to come by as many doctors bizarrely refuse to prescribe it. And I'm sure we've all noticed the headlines circulating recently involving a potential bird flu infecting chickens and even dairy milk in cows, which is why you should purchase the Contagion Emergency Kit from the Wellness Company, which, by the way, the entire kit will cost you less than most visits to the doctor. Kits are only available in the USA, however, everyone that can obtain one should have at least one of these kits in their household. If we find ourselves in an emergency situation, even a toothache or minor infection could become fatal, which is why preemptively having antibiotics on hand could literally save the life of yourself or a loved one. Head to www.twc.health/brightinsight and use promo code Bright insight. The link is in the description of this video and the pinned comment down below. Now, with all of that said, back to the disturbing part of this video. So get this. The 20-year partnership was done by members of the World Economic Forum back in 2018. Yes, you read that right. The tentacles of the WEF has seemingly infiltrated the world's oldest and most mysterious structure in all of human history. In fact, the chairman and CEO of the Dogus Group is a Turkish billionaire by the name of Ferit Sahenk, who is a longtime member of the World Economic Forum. And not only that, he's on the Forbes list of top billionaires in the world. And this 20-year partnership deal involving Gobekli Tepe was literally announced at the annual World Economic Forum meeting in Davos, Switzerland. They even had an ice sculpture of Gobekli Tepe carved outside the meeting itself. I mean, you can't make this up. But how on earth have I never heard of this before? I suppose that since it was back in 2016, few were talking about the WEF at that time, as it wasn't until just the last few years that they've received so much global attention. Certainly, much has changed in just the last 4 years alone, as I'm sure many of you have noticed. And although I imagine that most of you have heard of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum by now, but if you haven't, you will certainly want to inform yourself. And I am not going to get into specific details about that organization in this video. I'll refer you to the comment section for that, as I'm sure others here will help explain exactly who these people are, what they've done, and what their goals are for the future of global civilization. But this is where the Agenda 2030 and the "you will own nothing and be happy" comes from. And yes, that's a real quote by Klaus Schwab, the head of the WEF, or at least former head. And in fact, I'm sure you've probably heard or seen memes saying that "you will eat the bugs." Well, the WEF is what they're referring to. So I suppose right about now, it's reasonable to ask, why on earth is the World Economic Forum and their members even associated with management and excavations at Gobekli Tepe? Now, when Ferit Sahenk gave a speech in 2016 at that WEF meeting to announce the 20-year partnership, he said, and I quote, "We have placed the Turkish treasure at the heart of the World Economic Forum because I want the whole world to know about it. Gobekli Tepe, a common value of humanity, is our 0 point in time," referring to it being the earliest known structure of human civilization. And he went on to say, "Now, as we stand on the precipice of a fourth industrial revolution, in a time of great global change, the time is right to collaborate once again." Interesting. And again, that was way back in the beginning of 2016, so let me now share with you what has taken place in the 8 years since, as I am getting to what is arguably the most important part of this video, and something that will surely disturb all of us. As was described in their agenda, the first steps involved in the 20-year partnership was setting up the infrastructure for tourism and preservation, which included protective roofs in order to prevent weather and the elements from affecting this now exposed site. However, notice that the very foundation and support beams of this roof is comprised of, what it's comprised of is literally stabbing into the ruins itself. But more than that, notice in these various images, including different angles around the site, clearly show that the permanent viewing platform is not only obstructing the view of different parts of the site, which is a bit ironic, but more importantly, it is quite literally impeding the site from being fully excavated, as it's sitting directly on top of portions of the site that have not yet been dug. In fact, observe the walkway that surrounds the entire area, and notice that it's covering areas which still contain buried ruins, which we know from previous use of ground-penetrating radar scans. And by the way, here's a question. When exactly were these two orchards of trees, which are located in the midst of ruins of Gobekli Tepe, when were they planted? Because I found an aerial photograph from 2004, and as you can see, these two sets of orchards were not there at this time as compared to a more recent photo. Do any ancient ruins lie underneath these orchards? I mean, that is a sincere question, as I do not know if that is the case or not. However, considering we're talking about a total excavation area that's as large as 90 football fields, it would seem that these two sets of roofs and walkways that surround them clearly only make up a small fraction of that 22 acres. And speaking of walkways, it's worth mentioning that there are a total of 900 meters of walkways that were constructed here after this partnership began. And not to mention the roads that were literally built on top of, and in fact, even destroyed ruins at this site. And get this, the wife of the late archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who was the prestigious German professor who first began excavations at Gobekli Tepe until he unfortunately passed away in 2014, but his widow was an archaeologist herself, and she was invited to tour the new facilities at Gobekli Tepe in 2018. And what she witnessed upset her deeply and ended up garnering worldwide outrage when it was reported. When Mrs. Schmidt visited Gobekli Tepe, she was mortified to see that the use of heavy equipment and asphalt roads and concrete sidewalks had destroyed parts of this ancient site. She was even quoted as saying, "They call it a road, I call it destruction," or the other way around, and went on to say that they are doing everything in a rush that Klaus did not want, as he knew it would destroy Gobekli Tepe, and that she cannot begin to explain the extent of the destruction which she witnessed that morning. She said, and I quote, "My sorrow is hard to articulate. Every time I visit there, I see another fragmentation coming to light," and went on to say that as part of the construction of a protective roof, parts of the wooden walkway have been removed on the assumption that they would be put back later. However, now they are building a permanent concrete walkway instead, she said. And she took it upon herself to share photos on her Instagram at what had taken place, and thankfully, public outrage ensued as these photos circulated the internet, causing massive controversy, which led the Ministry of Culture and Tourism to issue a statement saying that, quote, "only construction equipment was used there," and went on to outright deny that concrete or asphalt was used there. Gee, that sure looks like concrete to me, wouldn't you say? But to make it worse, the ministry doubled down on their claims, saying that the allegations made by Mrs. Schmidt were, quote, "baseless and unscientific," and they strongly denied that any historical assets had been damaged. But again, Mrs. Schmidt is an archaeologist herself who worked at Gobekli Tepe alongside her husband. So that's totally insulting to her intelligence to deny what she had saw there with her own eyes. And the reality is that the evidence is there for all of us to see now. For example, as I mentioned a moment ago, 900 meters of concrete walkway were installed, and the foundation underneath it was layered with approximately 1 foot of stones, and then mortar was added under the curbs. Again, over areas of Gobekli Tepe which have relics that have not even been excavated. So consider the reality that these roads and walkways are now a total barrier from preventing excavations that could otherwise happen. Think about it. They would have to dig up all those roads, the rock, the asphalt, concrete walkways, as well as remove the infrastructure of the protective roofs themselves to make a full excavation of Gobekli Tepe even possible. In other words, they clearly have no intention to do so for the foreseeable future, as we can all see. And let's not forget that they told us directly that they are not going to fully excavate this site. Remember, they are leaving it for, quote, future generations. And although there are still archaeologists working on the site of Gobekli Tepe today, I'm not saying that there are 0 excavations taking place. However, the scope is incredibly limited, hence why that 5% figure is more or less the same. The reality is that any meaningful, large-scale dig of the remaining 14 circular enclosures that hold up a majority of the potentially 128 remaining pillars that remain hidden underground is currently at an indefinite standstill. Let that sink in. It seems to me that since the tentacles of the WEF infiltrated excavation management of Gobekli Tepe in 2016, that ever-constant 5% figure I discussed earlier seems directly related. And again, members of the WEF are the ones making decisions here. If they wanted to dig it up, they would. They could move the viewing platforms further away. They could do anything they want. They have literally billions of dollars at their disposal and the decision-making power along with it. I have to say that to not fully excavate this site is a borderline crime against humanity. In fact, it's totally inexcusable. All of the estimated 200 pillars need to be exhumed and studied. All people of Earth have a right to know as much as possible about the origins of mankind, especially considering how much of a mystery our lost past actually is. And these pillars are telling us a story. That is clear from the relatively few that have been excavated thus far. and who knows what answers are waiting to be discovered on the well over 100 pillars that remain hidden within the earth. Hidden answers of which could explain key information about our true ancient past. Which, by the way, that reminds me, let's not forget about the fascinating and very important detail involving the similarities of certain aspects of this site which we've seen in other places around the world, such as the so-called handbags, which have been compared to the Sumerians of ancient Iraq 6,000 years later. But even more fascinating compared to ones found all the way over in ancient Mexico. This is of course highly debated, but something that many consider to be potential evidence of a lost ancient global connection that is simply not supposed to have been possible. And while I'm at it, there are other similarities involving the placement of the hands in front of the pillars at Gobekli Tepe when compared to statues in Bolivia and South America, the Moai statues in Easter Island, and even as far away as Indonesia. This could of course be a coincidence, but the placement of the hands at the front is something that's particularly unique. Like I always say, look and think for yourself. Regardless, who knows what is inscribed into all the remaining pillars that we haven't seen yet? We simply don't know, and we will never know until we appropriately excavate this site. I honestly cannot believe the current state of modern archaeology today. It appears to have been corrupted, or at best, totally mismanaged at such a level that is now preventing us from actually learning information about our ancient past. I mean, to have an archaeological dig and not dig it up is the antithesis of actual archaeology, is it not? So at this time, I am calling on all archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, skeptics, and enthusiasts of ancient history alike to speak out about this incredible injustice. What we now have in front of us is a unique opportunity to come together in one common goal, which is to champion for further excavation at Gobekli Tepe. Free Gobekli Tepe. So spread the word. In fact, probably the best way to do that is to share this video across social media to bring as much attention to it as possible so people can understand the gravity of this situation. And let's let the courts of public opinion do their thing. Now, stay tuned. I will be hosting a live stream in the next couple days to discuss this topic, and I'm very excited to announce that I will be back to making 2 videos every single month, and each one of those videos will be followed by a live stream where I discuss the topic of that video. So stay tuned. The coming months are going to be quite interesting as I have a series of topics I've been sitting on for some time that I know you'll find to be very, very interesting. That said, leave a comment and share your thoughts on everything that was discussed in this video. And also follow me on Rumble. I'm growing a presence there. And if you're not on X, you should get on it. I'm on there trying to grow my presence. You can follow me there as well as Instagram. And if you want to support me personally, support me on locals.com, link in the description, or Patreon. That makes a big difference to me. But that said, I'm going to close it up here. Thank you for your time and stay tuned to that live stream. Bye now.